Hello and welcome to Satija English classes. To continue with the explanation of chapter The Triumph of Surgery, I'm here with another video. Students, in the previous video, we have read that how the dog Tricky, due to being pampered and overfed by his mistress Mrs. Pumphrey, fell ill and was hospitalized for 15 days under the observation of veterinary doctor James Harriot. To discover more what happens next, let's read the chapter. At the surgery, the household dog surged round me. At the surgery means hospital. When the narrator reached at the hospital, the other dogs surged means gathered around me. Me means the narrator. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes and when put down lay motionless on the carpet. When the narrator put Tricky down on the carpet, he laid motionless. Motionless means without any movement. And started looking at the noisy pack. Pack means the group of dogs who were making noise. He started looking at them with dull eyes. The other dogs, after sniffing around him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. The other dogs who came near him, they sniffed round him, means they smelled him with a noise and felt that he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. They didn't take care of his presence. Why he was an uninteresting object for them? Because he was not able to play with them. I made up a bed for him in a warm, loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. I made up. Made up means prepared. The narrator prepared a bed for him in a warm, opened box near the other dogs where they used to sleep. For 2 days, I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. For continuously 2 days, the narrator or the doctor didn't give him any food except plenty of water. Plenty of means a lot of water. Means he gave him no food for 2 days except water and kept an eye means observed him. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surrounding. And next day, means second day, the dog started taking interest in his surrounding, means in the things around him. And on the third, he began to whimper. Whimper means making a slow sound when he heard the dogs in the yard. When he heard the noise of the other dog, he started whimpering, making a low noise. I opened the door. I means the narrator. The narrator opened the door. Ricky trotted out, walked out with heavy steps because he was not able to move because of extra fat on his body and was immediately engulfed. Engulfed means covered by or encircled by the grey hound and his friends. Joe. Joe is the other dog who is greyhound, the breed of other dog, that is greyhound, and his friends means Joe and his friends, they encircled him, they surrounded Tricky. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved off down the garden. The other dogs, after giving some pushes to Tricky and inspecting him, is examining him, they went down to the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly. Tricky also followed the other dogs, rolling slightly. Rolling means moving with slight steps with his surplus fat. Surplus here means extra. extra fat. Because of excess fat on his body, he was moving with light steps. Later that day, I was present at feeding time. Next day, the narrator himself was present at the time of feeding to the dogs. I watched while Tristan here is another dog, slopped means spilled down the food into the balls. He was watching that Tristan was spilling some of the food out of the balls, and there was the usual headlong rush, and everybody was rushing towards their ball of food, and it was followed by the sounds of high speed eating. Everybody started eating their food with speed, due to which they were making sound. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. Every dog knew that if he was not able to finish his food, then the other's dog will come over there to share his food with them. Means, and this will be a competition for him. When they had finished, and after finishing their food, Tricky took a walk around the shining balls. Now, after completing their food, the Tricky went around the shining balls, licking casually inside one or two of them, and he started licking some food that was left inside the balls. Next day, an extra bowl was put out for him. When the narrator saw all these things, then he put one extra bowl of food for Tricky also. And I was pleased. Pleased means happy. And I was very happy to see him jostling his way. Jostling means pushing others to make his way toward it. It means the bowl that was served to him for food. From them on, his progress. Progress means the speed of his progress means the speed of his being cured was rapid. Rapid here means fast, quick, and he had no medicinal treatment of any kind. He was not given any kind of medicine as a treatment, but all day he ran about with the dogs. One thing that was doing all about the day, that was running about with other dogs, joining in their friendly scrimmages. Scrimmages means fight. As you know that the dogs have some slight friendly fights with each other, and this was a sort of fun for them. And he found that all these things have some joy. They were bowling each other, they were trampling on, they were bowled over means pushing each other, they were trampled on means crushing each other, and they were squishing each other, squeezing each other every few minutes. Every time they were doing all these things with each other. He became an accepted member of the gang. Now he has been accepted by the other dogs, an unlikely, silky little object among the shaggy crew. He was different from the others. Shaggy crew means the group of dog. He was different from the other dogs because he was silky, smooth object, fighting like a tiger for his share at meal times. He used to fight like a tiger for his share at meal times, and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. And at night, he used to run about in the old hen house to hunt the rats. And he had never had such a time in his life, and this was an unusual experience of his life. All the while, Mrs. Pumphrey hovered anxiously in the background. At the same time, Mrs. Pumphrey, she used to hover, means hangover, anxiously, with anxiety, with worriness of the health of Tricky, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletin. Bulletins means news. She used to make calls at least a dozen times a day for the news of health of Tricky. I dodged. Dodged means avoided the questions about whether his cushions were being turned regularly or the correct coat worn according to the weather. I tried to avoid the silly question being asked by her regularly whether the cushions of Tricky had been changed regularly or the coat that he used to wear were according to the weather or not. But I was able to tell her that the little fellow here is Tricky, But I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger. I usually simply say her that the tricky was out of danger and convalescing rapidly. Convalescing means getting his health back rapidly, speedily. The word convalescing seemed to do something to Mrs. Pumphrey. This word convalescing means getting health back. You seemed too louder to Mrs. Pumphrey. She thought that Tricky had gone some operation, and she started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozens at a time, to build up Tricky's strength. To build up Tricky's strength, she started bringing some fresh eggs, not one or two, but at least 2 dozen at a time. For a happy period, my partners and I had 2 eggs each for breakfast. Happy period of me and my partner had started because now we were getting 2 eggs each for breakfast. But when the bottles of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on, means appeared the house. Happy time, the possibility of more happy time dawn upon them, means appeared in the house when the wine began to arrive. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. I think that this was being sent to increase Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion. Ceremonial means festive. Now, lunch had become a festive occasion for us with 2 glasses of wine because at lunchtime we have been served 2 glasses of wine before and several during the meal. That's why they have been getting a good time these days. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution. It was very difficult to believe that besides eggs and wine, now Mrs. Pumphrey had started sending brandy to build up Tricky's constitution. Constitution means physical structure or strength. To put a final edge on, to make it quick. What Tricky's constitution means to make a quick recovery of Tricky's constitution means physical strength. She had started sending brandy. For a few nights, the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled, and reverently drunk. Here, what do you mean by reverently? Means respectfully. Due to all these things, eggs, wine, and brandy, the narrator and his partners, all they were in high spirits. They were feeling good, just as a good time rolled around. Inhaled, they were relishing it, they were enjoying it, and reverently drunk after having a respectfully drink. They were days of deep content. Content means satisfaction. These days were having a deep satisfaction for them. Started well with the extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained. Sustained means maintained by the midday wine and finishment at the end of the day. Luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. Luxuriously means with pleasures. Now their good time started. How? Now they were getting at breakfast extra egg in the morning, and this was improved and maintained by the wine at lunch, and at the finishing time means at dinner they were having a great pleasures by taking brandy near the fire. It was a temptation. Temptation means attraction to keep tricking on as a permanent guest. They were very much tempted, means attracted due to all these comforts, having eggs, wine, and brandy. They wanted to have Tricky as a permanent guest. They don't want to part from Tricky. But I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering, and after a fortnight, felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. But I also know it very well, Miss the narrator knew it very well, that Mrs. Pumphrey loved Tricky too much, and now she was suffering from the separation of Tricky. And after a fortnight, after 15 days, felt compelled. Now he felt compelled, he forced to make a call to Mrs. Pumphrey to tell her that now Tricky, means the little dog, had recovered and was awaiting collection. Awaiting means waiting impatiently. Collection to get it back. Now she should come and get him back. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming, gleaming here means shining, shining black metal. Here, black metal refers to car, drew up, stopped outside the surgery. Surgery here is hospital. Within few minutes of this information conveyed to Mrs. Pumphrey, now she came over there in a car and stopped it outside the hospital. The chauffeur here is driver, opened the door and I could just make out means understood, the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey. Now who recognized that it was none other than Mrs. Pumphrey. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her and her lips trembled. Oh, Mr. Harriet, do tell me the truth. Is he really better? Now, Mrs. Pumphrey, she was holding her hands very tightly in front of her and her lips were trembling and confirmed it from doctor whether the tricky was all fine. Yes, he was fine. To which doctor responded, yes, he was absolutely fine. There's no need for you to get out of the car, and asked her not to get out of the car. I'll go and fetch him, and asked that he would go and bring Tricky back. I walked through the house into the garden. Now the narrator went to the garden that was at the back of the house. A mass of dogs, a group of dogs, was hurtling. Hurtling means running fast, round and round the lawn, and in their midst was lap flapping tail waving was the little golden figure of Tricky. And among them there was a golden figure of Tricky, whose ears were flapping, means waving, and tail also moving. And in 2 weeks he had been transformed, changed into the lithe means flexible, hard muscled animal. Now his muscles become hard and he became flexible, and he was keeping up well with the pack. Now he was able to get well with the pack. Pack means the others dog, the group of dogs, and stretching out in great bounds. Now he was able to pull his body with a great jump, and his chest almost brushing the ground. When he used to walk, it seemed just as his chest is brushing the ground, touching the ground. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. I carried Tricky back through the passage to the front of the house where she was in the car. The chauffeur, the driver, was still holding the car door open. He was still holding the door of the car, and it was open. And when Tricky saw his mistress, he took off from my arms in a tremendous, a huge leap. Leap means jump, and moved into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. She gave a startled means surprised, ooh, when Tricky saw his mistress. Immediately he jumped out of the narrator's arms into the lap of Mrs. Pumphrey with a tremendous leap. And Mrs. Pumphrey was startled and made a ooh sound, and then had to defend herself as he swarmed over her, licking her face and barking. And then Tricky, when jumped on Pumphrey, she tried to defend herself. Defend means save herself. As he swarmed over her, as he with full energy, he jumped over Mrs. Pumphrey and started licking her face and barked. During the excitement, I helped the chauffeur chauffeur means driver, to bring out the beds, toys, cushions, coats, balls, and none of which had been used. Here, chauffeur is driver, and I helped the chauffeur. I hear the narrator or the doctor. The doctor helped the driver to bring out the belongings of tricky like beds, toys, cushions, cots, bowls. Although all these things were not have been used by him. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out of the window. Leaned out means bent out, peeped out of the window. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey bent out of the window. Tears shone in her eyes. There were tears in her eyes, and her lips trembled. Trembled means shivering. Why her lips were trembling and there were tears in her eyes? Because of extreme happiness and excitement. Oh, Mr. Harriet, she cried. How can I ever thank you? She said that she does not have any words to say him thank you. This is a triumph of surgery. Triumph is victory, and surgery means hospital, means where he has been given treatment, got success. It was the real victory. So, this is the chapter. I hope you have understood it. Thank you.